Learning Hilchos Sukkah and Lulav. Schach sheyabei chalonos. The schach that had openings. She'avir nira mehan. You can see the air, the atmosphere. Let's go to the Peirush. The Peirush, if yesh b'kol ha'avir k'chol amokim ha'mesuchoch, if the holes in the schach are equal to the schach, then for sure it's possible because the light that will stream through the holes will be greater than the shade given by the covering. Whenever there's more sun than shade, it's not a schach. But if when you look below, the shade of the schach is greater than the air, then it's kosher. My Mishnah cites the Mishnah. Sukkah meduvleles. A sukkah which has areas which are more tightly covered, others less so, and whose shade is greater than the sun, is kosher. In the Gemara, Rav explains sukkah aniyo. It's a poor sukkah. The Gemara, what is meduvleles? They explain it's also meruv mechamso. They both mean the same thing. That there's not a lot of schach, and therefore it's very thinly laid. And there are other possibilities in explaining the Mishnah, but nobody disagrees. La Halacha. The Halacha Mishnah questions why the Magen Mishnah have to bring the words of the Rav. It would be enough to say the Kush and the Teretz of the Gemara to understand the Rambam. What do you have to add? What does he add by saying Sukkah Aniyah? The source of the Rambam is in the Gemara. That there's another possibility, and the Gemara, the question, the Mishnah says that if the shade is greater than the sun, with the area the sun penetrates, it's kosher. That would seem to say that if the shade and the sun are equal as possible, and in a different Mishnah in the Sukkah Daf Beis it says if the sun is greater than the shade is possible, but if it would be equal, it would seem as kosher. And the answer here, the question is whether we're talking above or below. The Rif explains that if the equivalent on top, then for sure below there'll be too much light. But if on the ground they're equal, then it would be kosher. Even that, but because there's much more schach than holes in the schach. Rae Gann adds, if the schach is more than the air, it's kosher, even though they're equivalent below on the ground. Because even by a wall, we say if what the part that broke is equivalent to that which remains, it's you can carry. Only above the tail has to be more than the ear spaces. Poets ko'im and muta is when we're talking about walls, or when we count from a place where the shade and the sun fall in the ground, that the sukkah, it depends on shade, as it says sukkah. We find in Sukkah Beis, Sukkah tiyeh l'tzel yom. The Sukkah should be as a shade during the day. And that Sukkah is on the schach that it saves. Rabbeinu Manoach cites on the Rebbe and Geirs that only when the sun is more than the schach it's possible, if it's more than the shade, because the shemesh goes through the holes. But if it comes through the dafnois, suchos, through the walls, it doesn't pass. When we're talking about the sun is directly overhead, from the sides, even if it's full of sun, it would be kosher. Meaning, if you have 10 tefachim high the walls, and above the walls there's, for example, 20 tefachim, then there'll be much more sun than shade when the sun is on the side. Now, Rae Gann explains that Teishu came to Duru, a person sits in a place where he eats, where he has windows, and the windows are in the walls, so windows in the walls don't bother us. But in the ceiling, they don't have windows. The Goz Maimon cites from Rashi, who explains here it's above, it's below. If it's above the sikuch and the sun are equal as possible, because the sun will be seen on the ground much more. But if they're equivalent and below, for sure you know that above you had much more schach. Machon Nesher says the halacha is a sukkah, that the sun is and the shade are equivalent. Above it's possible, because below it'll be more sun. But if the sun and the shade are equivalent, it's kosher. The halacha cites the tur b'shem meitur, that he uses the opposite. And that Mechaber doesn't mention them because the Rambam, the Rif, the Rosh, all hold like Rashi. Say that it's referring to the schach on top, not on the ground. So what happens with the shade?